Whispers on the wind. Dust Gulch squatted on the Texas plains, a parched collection of buildings clinging to the earth like ticks on a hound. A gritty wind, ever present, buffeted, weathered, clabbered, and rattled the sun-faded signs of the mercantile, the saloon, and the mortuary bordering the dusty plaza. Residents moved with calculated slowness. Their faces maps of hard-won survival wrested from a land of scarcity. An unusual tension laced the air, a palpable warning of the approaching tempest churning southward. The once azure sky had deepened to a violet bruise, and the wind keened like a mournful spirit, hinting at things to come. Even the buzzards, normally circling idly, had sought refuge in the sparse, twisted branches of the mesquite trees. Inside the dusty mug, nervous murmurs disrupted the usual afternoon quiet. Hemlock, his face a web of wrinkles, sipped at weak whiskey, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "She's brewin', mark my words," he croaked, his voice roughened by years of tobacco and rotgut. "Worst blow I've seen in half a century." Mabel, the saloon's full-figured proprietress, polished glasses with unnecessary force across the room. "The storm's bad enough, Hemlock," she retorted, her voice clipped, "but have you heard about Jebediah's bride? Doing on the stage today." A wave of speculation rippled through the room. Jebediah Stone was a local titan, his Stone Cross ranch dominating the landscape. A man of few words and even fewer smiles, he was known for his steely resolve and considerable wealth. The prospect of him marrying, especially a mail-order bride from the East, was fuel for weeks of gossip. "Mail order, huh?" drawled Clem, a lean cowboy, spitting a stream of amber into a nearby receptacle. "Reckon she's a homely one. No citified gal's gonna willingly shackle herself to old Jebediah." Martha, the baker's wife, pausing for a quick chat, countered, "Don't be so sure, Clem. I heard she's got her own money. Maybe she wants a strong man to shield her." "Shield her from what?" Hemlock rasped, a dry chuckle escaping his lips. "Jebediah protects his own, and that's that." The speculation continued, stoked by boredom and the gathering storm. They conjured her image. A meek, plain woman desperate for a husband. A cunning fortune-seeker hoping to snag Jebediah's wealth. A delicate bloom wilting under the harsh Texas sun. Each imagined version grew more elaborate than the last. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Dust Gulch, Jebediah Stone stood on the porch of his imposing ranch house, the Stone Cross. The structure, built of solid stone and heavy timbers, stood as a testament to his relentless labor and unwavering will. A bulwark against the elements, it symbolized his dominion over the land. He was a spare, angular man with eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was etched with the lines of hardship, his jaw set in a permanent scowl. He wore a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt, his calloused hands resting near the handle of his revolver. He scanned his domain, his gaze encompassing the sprawling pastures and the thousands of cattle grazing upon them. He was intrinsically linked to the land, a primal connection few could understand. He felt the approaching storm, a deep-seated awareness that resonated within him. He held no particular anticipation for the arrival of his mail-order bride. He'd sent for her out of obligation, a need to ensure his line continued. He required an heir, and time was passing. He had been forthright in his letters, describing himself as a rancher, a widower, a man of substance. He had neither exaggerated nor deceived. He offered her security, a home, and a comfortable life. He expected obedience, fealty, and a son. Love was not part of the equation. Long ago he deemed love a luxury he couldn't indulge. It was a weakness, a vulnerability to be exploited. His heart lay buried alongside his first wife, years in the past. A swirling dust devil danced across the yard, sending grit flying. He squinted, shielding his eyes. The stagecoach was overdue. He consulted his pocket watch, a weighty gold heirloom from his father. Still no sign. A flicker of impatience crossed his features, quickly suppressed. He had little tolerance for tardiness. As the storm intensified, the wind increased, and the sky deepened. He hoped the stage would make it through. Her arrival amidst a deluge would be unfortunate. A bad omen, perhaps. Or maybe, he thought with a rare flash of cynicism, perfectly appropriate. He turned and re-entered the house, the heavy door thudding shut behind him. Preparations were required. The storm was imminent, bringing with it a stranger, a woman who held the key to his future, a woman who would either solidify his legacy or become another victim of the unforgiving landscape. Whispers rode the wind, carrying a warning, a premonition of disruption, a hint of the chaos about to engulf Dust Gulch. And Jebediah Stone, the man who believed he held all the reins, could only wait and see what the storm and his mail-order bride would unleash. Clementine's escape. The scent of yeast and sugar hung heavy in the Buttercup Bakery, a familiar comfort that had begun to feel like a cage. Clementine kneaded dough with practiced ease, her hands moving rhythmically, but her mind was miles away, chasing tumbleweeds across a vast, imagined desert. Outside, Harmony Creek, Kansas, drowsed in the summer heat, a town as predictable as the rising of the sun. Clementine glanced at the clock above the oven. Another hour, another batch of sugar cookies, another day closer to what, exactly? Her sister, Beatrice, bustled past, a whirlwind of flour and efficiency. Clementine, are those apple pies ready to come out? Mrs. Henderson's coming by any minute, and you know how she is about punctuality. Almost be, Clementine replied, forcing a smile. Beatrice, with her sensible shoes and even more sensible outlook on life, couldn't understand Clementine's restless spirit. Harmony Creek was Beatrice's whole world. For Clementine, it felt like a gilded cage. Later, after the lunch rush had subsided and the aroma of baking bread had mellowed, Clementine escaped to the small office behind the bakery. She pretended to be balancing the books, but her gaze kept drifting to the stack of newspapers awaiting recycling. Clementine loved to read, but the Harmony Creek Gazette rarely offered anything beyond local gossip and farm reports. On top of the stack was a larger newspaper from Kansas City, a relic from Beatrice's last trip. Clementine reached for it, the familiar rustle of newsprint a small thrill. Skimming the pages, her eyes snagged on a small, bordered advertisement in the back pages. Wanted, wife. Rancher seeks hardworking, honest woman to share life in Montana territory. Must be willing to relocate. Send photograph and letter to Jebediah Stone, Dust Gulch, Montana. Clementine's breath hitched. Dust Gulch, Montana. The words conjured images of sweeping plains, snow-capped mountains, and a life untamed. Jebediah Stone. The name sounded as rugged as the landscape he inhabited. She should dismiss it, she knew. It was foolish, impractical, perhaps even dangerous. Mail-order brides were a relic of a bygone era, a desperate measure for lonely men and women with nowhere else to turn. But the seed of adventure had been planted, and it was already sprouting tendrils of longing in her heart. Days turned into weeks, each one a silent battle between Clementine's desire for freedom and her loyalty to her family. She watched Beatrice, content in her routine, and felt a pang of guilt. Her parents, already burdened by the bakery and their aging health, needed her. But wasn't she allowed to want something more? One sweltering afternoon, while frosting a particularly elaborate wedding cake, Clementine made her decision. The bride figurine, perched atop the sugary confection, seemed to mock her with its perfect, preordained happiness. Clementine carefully set down her piping bag. That night, under the cloak of darkness, Clementine packed a small valise. She included her best dress, a practical woolen skirt, a few well-worn books, and, most importantly, her recipe book filled with handwritten notes and family secrets. She also included a small tin of her famous lavender shortbread, a sweet reminder of home. She left a note for her family propped against the sugar bowl on the kitchen table. The words were carefully chosen, filled with love and regret. She explained her yearning for something more, her need to explore the world beyond Harmony Creek. She promised to write, to send money when she could, to never forget them. Leaving the bakery was the hardest thing she had ever done. The familiar smells of cinnamon and vanilla clung to her clothes, a bittersweet reminder of all she was leaving behind. As she walked towards the train station, the first rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, a low growl that seemed to mirror the turmoil in her heart. She bought a one-way ticket to Montana. As the train pulled away from Harmony Creek, Clementine looked back at the twinkling lights of her hometown, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Fear mingled with excitement, a potent cocktail that left her trembling. She was Clementine Buttercup, baker's daughter, and she was running away to become a mail-order bride. And as the train lurched forward, disappearing into the vast darkness, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her in Dust Gulch. The gruff cattle baron. The Montana sun beat down on Jebediah Stone's weathered face as he surveyed his spread. Dust devils danced across the parched earth, mirroring the restlessness in his own gut. He watched a line of cowboys, silhouetted against the shimmering horizon, driving a herd of cattle toward the south pasture. The rhythmic creak of saddle leather and the lowing of the beasts were a familiar symphony, a constant in his life. Yet today, the sounds offered little comfort. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a calloused hand, the rough fabric of his shirt abrasive against his skin. Jebediah wasn't a man given to introspection, but the arrival of the noon train weighed heavily on him. On that train, if all went according to plan, would be Clementine, his mail-order bride. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. The very notion felt foreign on his tongue. He, Jebediah Stone, needing to send off to Kansas for a wife? It smacked of weakness, of admitting defeat. But the truth was, years of hard work had built him a cattle empire, but left him with an empty hearth and a loneliness that gnawed at him like a persistent coyote. He'd tried the local girls, of course. The dances in Dust Gulch were always overflowing with eligible women, eager to snag a successful rancher. But their eyes always seemed to linger a little too long on the size of his ranch, the number of his cattle. He longed for someone who saw him, Jebediah, not just the Stone fortune. He remembered Clara May. Pretty as a painted sunset, she was. But she'd run off with a traveling salesman after only a month of marriage, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and a bitter taste in Jebediah's mouth. Then there was Sarah, sweet as honey, but frail, unable to withstand the harsh realities of ranch life. She'd succumbed to a winter cough, leaving him with a grief that still clung to him like morning mist. So, he'd turned to the mail-order bride catalog, a last resort born of desperation. He'd requested someone practical, someone strong, someone willing to work. Clementine, from her letters, seemed to fit the bill. Her words were simple, honest, and devoid of flowery sentiment. He just hoped he hadn't made another mistake. "Penny for your thoughts, boss?" Jebediah turned to see Dusty Mac McMillan approaching, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by years of sun and wind. Mac was his right-hand man, a loyal and dependable soul who'd been with him since he'd inherited the ranch from his pa. "Just thinking about that train," Jebediah grunted, nodding toward the distant tracks. Mac leaned against the fence post, his gaze following Jebediah's. "Expecting company, are we?" A hint of amusement danced in his eyes. Jebediah scowled. "You know damn well I am, Mac. Just making conversation, Jebediah. No need to get your spurs in a twist." Mac chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "She must be something special to get you all riled up like this." "She's practical," Jebediah said, the word sounding hollow even to his own ears. Mac spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed alarmingly close to Jebediah's boots. "Practical, huh? That ain't exactly the word most men use when describing their future wife." "Well, I ain't most men," Jebediah retorted, his voice sharper than he intended. Mac held up his hands in mock surrender. All right. No need to bite my head off. Just remember, Jebediah, sometimes the things we think we need ain't the things we actually want." Jebediah frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mac shrugged. "Just saying, don't be so focused on finding a workhorse that you forget to look for a little sunshine." He winked, then pushed himself off the fence post. "Now, I gotta get back to those cattle. Don't want them wandering off and causing trouble. Just like some folks I know." He grinned, then ambled off, leaving Jebediah to ponder his cryptic words. Sunshine. Jebediah hadn't thought about sunshine in a long time. He only hoped Clementine wouldn't bring a storm. Arrival in the storm. The stagecoach bucked like a bronco, its wheels mired in muck that clawed at its undercarriage. Rain lashed the canvas roof, a furious drumming that muted all but the most desperate pleas for deliverance. Clementine gripped a time-worn carpetbag, her knuckles gleaming bone-white. Beside her, a diminutive blizzard of white fluff, Princess Fluffy but shivered, a vibrating ball of anxiety pressed against her mistress's leg. "Hush now," Clementine soothed, her voice a fragile thread against the tempest's roar. The little dog countered with a guttural snarl seemingly aimed at the downpour itself. Clementine offered a wan smile. The dog's audacity was both absurd and reassuring. The journey westward had been an ordeal, a monotonous vista dissolving into a relentless barrage of bumps and bounces. Yet nothing could have prepped her for Dust Gulch, or rather, the wrath with which it greeted her. The squall had twisted an already desolate landscape into a maelstrom of mud and bluster. Silas, the driver, his face a granite mask of resolve, wrestled with the reins. "Hang on, ladies," he hollered, his voice ragged. Neither felt an eternity away. Clementine squeezed her eyes shut, conjuring the ranch, the haven she yearned to build. Jebediah's missives had sketched a scene of tranquil prosperity, of boundless horizons, and a life divorced from the clamorous city she had forsaken. She clung to that vision, a flickering ember in the storm-racked gloom. At long last, with a final, teeth-rattling jolt, the coach wheezed to a standstill. Silas flung open the door, the wind snatching at it like a ravenous wolf. Dust Gulch, he announced, his voice barely audible. Terminus. Clementine peered out, her spirits plummeting. Dust Gulch was less a township and more a scattering of dilapidated structures huddled for survival. Rain poured in torrents, blurring everything beyond arm's reach. A lone silhouette stood beneath the wavering glow of a saloon lamp, its form broad and imposing. That'll be Jebediah, Silas grunted, jerking his chin. Figured he'd be waiting some. Clementine inhaled deeply, bracing herself. This was it. Her new beginning. She carefully retrieved her carpetbag and, with Princess Fluffy nestled securely in her arms, ventured into the tempest. The wind instantly stole her breath. Rain plastered her tresses to her face and mud clung like leeches to her boots. She faltered, nearly losing purchase, but righted herself. The figure beneath the saloon lamp stirred, his features still veiled by shadow. Clementine, he called, his voice a low rumble that cut through the gale with surprising clarity. Yes, she replied, her voice shaky. I'm Clementine. He advanced, and she finally caught a glimpse of him. Jebediah Stone was taller and more time-etched than she had envisioned. His face was scored with lines that whispered of hardship and solitude, his eyes mirroring the color of the turbulent skies above. He wore a lengthy duster that flapped wildly in the wind, his hands appearing gnarled and work-worn. He appraised her, his expression inscrutable. Welcome to Dust Gulch, he greeted, his tone devoid of cordiality. Clementine summoned a weak smile. Thank you, she responded. Abruptly, Princess Fluffy, but silent until now, exploded. She thrashed in Clementine's embrace, barking furiously at Jebediah. Tiny teeth gleamed and her gaze burned with unexpected fervor. What in blazes is that? Jebediah questioned, his brow furrowed in displeasure. This is Princess Fluffy, but Clementine explained, struggling to restrain the squirming canine. She's protective. Princess Fluffy continued her tirade, her high-pitched barks echoing in the storm's fury. She lunged, snapping at Jebediah's hand. He recoiled, his eyes widening in surprise. Plain, he muttered, more to himself than to Clementine. The advertisement omitted the detail of a plain woman with a ferocious lapdog. Clementine's cheeks burned. She tightened her hold on Princess Fluffy, but her own resolve solidifying. Perhaps this new chapter wouldn't be as serene as she had dreamt. However, one thing was certain, she would not allow this dour, imposing man to intimidate her. And she most certainly wouldn't tolerate him insulting her dog. She only bites those she dislikes, Clementine declared, her voice surprisingly resolute. Perhaps you should endeavor to be more agreeable. Princess Fluffy, but as if comprehending, emitted one final, triumphant yap, then settled back into Clementine's arms, her diminutive form still trembling, yet now with a sense of accomplishment. The storm raged on, but for the first time since arriving in Dust Gulch, Clementine sensed a flicker of something akin to hope. And a generous helping of defiance. Plain and precious. Jebediah scrutinized Clementine, his gaze snagging a moment too long on her spectacles, smudged with grime from the iron horse. She was unexpected. The advertisement had painted a portrait of a hardy woman, a capable partner ready to embrace frontier life. Clementine looked as if a good sneeze might send her tumbling back east. You are tinier than I'd reckoned, he blurted, the words escaping before he could corral them. Rudeness wasn't his intent, truly. Just astonishment. And unvarnished truth, however awkward, was a principle he lived by. Clementine's chin rose a fraction. The breeze, which had been flirting with her skirts, stilled. Even the dust devils seemed to hold their breath, suspended in their whirling dance. And you, Mr. Stone, she countered, her tone surprisingly resolute, are less diplomatic than advertised. The ensuing silence hummed with tension. Then, a throaty rumble, felt more than heard, emerged from the depths of Clementine's carpetbag. Jebediah hadn't registered the animal's presence. A ludicrous ball of white fluff with obsidian eyes. It peered out from the bag's opening like a demented dandelion. He leaned closer, curious. And what might this be? He inquired, cocking his head. Bad choice. With a shrill bark, the cotton puff detonated from the carpetbag in a miniature snowstorm of fur. It landed squarely on Jebediah's boot, latching onto the leather with disproportionate tenacity. He yelped, more startled than hurt. He shook his leg, attempting to dislodge the tiny fury. Get off! Confound it! Woman, control your beast. Clementine, her cheeks flushed a blossoming rose, knelt, attempting to cajole the dog. Princess Fluffy, but no. Naughty girl. Mr. Stone meant no harm. She shot a pleading look at Jebediah. She's very protective. Protective? It was trying to amputate his foot. Finally, he flicked the creature away, sending it spinning into the dusty ground. Princess Fluffybutt, unperturbed, scurried back to Clementine, resuming her post as guard. "I believe she takes exception to your assessment of my build," Clementine suggested, a hint of amusement threading through her voice despite the gravity of the situation, namely, her dog attempting to dismember her future spouse. Jebediah straightened, brushing grit from his trousers. The dog fixed him with a glare, a silent vow of future vengeance in its beady gaze. He looked from the canine to Clementine, then back again. He sighed. This was veering far from his plans. "Look," he began, raking a hand through his already untamed hair. "My apologies. No offense intended. It's just, you defy expectations. And I suppose you were precisely as I envisioned?" Clementine shot back, hands settling on her hips. He paused, considering. "Fair enough," he conceded. "I'm not usually this graceless." He offered a hand, palm upward. "Truce." Clementine hesitated, her gaze darting between Jebediah's offered hand and the still growling Princess Fluffybutt. At last she nodded, a nascent smile playing about her lips. "Truce," she echoed, placing her hand in his. His hand was coarse, hardened, and unexpectedly warm. A craftsman's hand intimately familiar with the feel of reins and the heft of a tool. A far cry from the delicate, perfumed hands she'd known in Philadelphia. As their fingers meshed, a sudden gust swept through Dust Gulch, carrying the dry, sharp scent of sage and the promise of rain. Clementine shivered, but not entirely from the chill. "Well," Jebediah said, releasing her hand, "let's get you and Princess Fluffybutt settled. It's a lengthy ride to the ranch." He hoisted her valise, the leather groaning in protest. He'd also need to retrieve her trunk from the depot. Clementine picked up her carpet bag, giving Princess Fluffybutt a reassuring scratch. As she followed Jebediah toward the waiting wagon, she couldn't dispel the notion that she'd stepped into a narrative far more intricate and infinitely more captivating than any she could have dreamt up back in her bakery. Ranch life blues. The sun, no golden muse for a painter's canvas as she'd naively envisioned, scorched Clementine's skin like a brand. 3 days at the ranch, each a brutal lesson in her own ineptitude. The chickens, Jebediah had sighed, a sound layered with barely concealed chagrin, needed tending. Simple enough, she'd assumed, picturing a graceful distribution of feed. What followed was a chaotic ballet of flapping wings and shrill squawks, a feathered pandemonium that nipped at her ankles and ignited Princess Fluffybutt into a whirlwind of snapping teeth. Grain adorned Clementine more than the ground, clinging to her like unwanted confetti. Then came the milking. Forget pastoral serenity. Bess, a bovine with a clear agenda, aimed to punt her into the next county, and the milk chose everywhere but the pail. Eventually, Jebediah took over, a study in quiet efficiency, leaving Clementine to absorb the potent aroma of cow dung and the sting of failure. Even laundry, usually a balm for her soul, became a torment. The wind, once a welcome embrace, now conspired to snatch garments from the line, flinging them into the grasping sagebrush. The landscape's vastness, initially inspiring, pressed down on her, isolating her from everything familiar. That evening, after a supper of beans and jerky as chewy as boot leather, Clementine retreated to the sparse room Jebediah had allotted her. The walls were barren, the furnishings minimal. Her only solace was Buttercup's bliss, the small photograph of her bakery perched precariously on the nightstand. Touching the frame, she traced the cheerful awning and geranium-filled window boxes. A potent wave of homesickness crashed over her, a visceral ache in her chest. She longed for the warm, yeasty air, the comforting cacophony of her kitchen, the cheerful banter of her patrons. She yearned for the dependable rhythm of her old life. Here, chaos reigned. Jebediah, while not cruel, remained distant, his words curt, his expression guarded. She hadn't witnessed a flicker of a smile since her arrival. He treated her with wary deference, as if she were fragile glass. Princess Fluffybutt, sensing her owner's despair, nudged Clementine's hand with a cold nose and emitted a soft whine. Gathering the small dog close, Clementine buried her face in its surprisingly downy fur. "Oh, Fluffybutt," she choked out, tears welling. "What have I gotten myself into? I'm not meant for this." The dog lapped at a stray tear, its tail a soft metronome against her ribs, a small, yet significant, comfort. Later, bathed in the moon's spectral glow, Clementine lay wide awake. The wind shrieked outside, rattling the windows and seeping through the cracks. She imagined it carrying her scent, her sorrow, back to the familiar streets she missed. She pictured her mother who had nurtured her adventurous spirit yet would no doubt recoil at this harsh reality. She conjured images of her bakery, her friends, her cherished life. Then an unwelcome thought wormed its way into her consciousness. Had she committed a grave error? Had she exchanged contentment for a fool's errand? Only Princess Fluffybutt's gentle heartbeat punctuated the silence, a tiny, loyal drum against the vastness of the Montana night. Clementine closed her eyes, but sleep remained a distant shore replaced by a rising tide of despair. The ranch life blues had taken root and she saw no easy way to uproot them. An unlikely shadow. Jebediah felt the familiar prickle of anxiety settle in his gut as he surveyed the south pasture. The late spring had been unkind and the grass was thin. He needed to move the herd sooner than planned. He chewed on a piece of dry grass, the taste doing little to soothe his nerves. He was a man of the land, not of he wasn't entirely sure what Clementine was a woman of. Certainly not ranching. A soft thump-thump-thump reached his ears. He ignored it. Must be a rabbit. Thump-thump-thump. Closer now? Irritated, he turned. Princess Fluffy, all 4 pounds of her, was gamely trotting towards him, her tongue lolling out. She looked like a cotton ball caught in a dust devil. Jebediah sighed. Of all the things he hadn't expected about married life, being stalked by a miniature white tornado was near the top. Go on, get back to the house, he grumbled, turning away. He started walking, hoping to discourage her. Thump-thump-thump. She kept pace, her tiny legs a blur. He could almost hear her panting. He stopped again, exasperated. I got work to do, little dog. Shoo. He waved his hand dismissively. Princess Fluffy but didn't shoo. She just sat, her beady eyes fixed on him with an unsettling intensity. He could practically hear Clementine's voice in her high-pitched yaps. Jebediah resumed his inspection of the pasture, trying to ignore the persistent thump-thump-thump that followed him like a shadow. He checked the fence line, kicking at loose posts. He examined the water trough, ensuring it was full. All the while, Princess Fluffy but remained a steadfast, if diminutive, presence. He rounded the far corner of the pasture and nearly tripped over a gopher hole. Blast it all, he exclaimed, catching himself. He glared at the offending hole, then at the dog. See? This is why you gotta stay put. You'll break a leg. Princess Fluffy tilted her head, seemingly considering the wisdom of his words. Then, with a determined little huff, she settled down right next to the hole as if guarding it from further treachery. Later that afternoon, Jebediah was wrestling with a recalcitrant gate hinge when Dusty Mac McMillan ambled over. Mac was a grizzled old hand who'd seen it all, or so he claimed. He leaned against the fence, chewing on a plug of tobacco. Mighty fine-looking shadow you got there, Jeb, Mac drawled, spitting a stream of brown juice into the dirt. Jebediah grunted, hammering at the hinge. She won't leave me be. Maybe she likes your company. Mac chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. She likes Clementine's company, Jebediah corrected, his frustration bubbling over. She's just lost without her. He didn't add that he understood the feeling a little too well. Mac watched Princess Fluffybutt, who was now diligently sniffing at Jebediah's boots, her tiny tail wagging furiously. Animals got a sense about things, Jeb. Maybe she sees something in you. Jebediah scoffed. Like what? A giant chew toy? Mac shrugged. Maybe she sees you need a friend. You ain't exactly been the chattiest fella these past few days. He paused, then added, sometimes the smallest things can make the biggest difference. Jebediah hammered the hinge one last time, securing it in place. He straightened up, wiping the sweat from his brow. He glanced at Princess Fluffybutt, who was now lying at his feet, her eyes closed. She looked utterly content. He knelt down, hesitantly extending a hand. He scratched her gently behind the ears. She didn't flinch or pull away. She just sighed softly, nestling closer to his hand. A ghost of a smile touched Jebediah's lips. Well, I'll be, he murmured. Maybe Mac was right. Maybe even a tiny, fluffy dog could see something he couldn't. Or maybe she was just lonely. Either way, for the first time since Clementine's arrival, a sliver of warmth bloomed in his chest. He still had a ranch to run, a herd to move, and a wife to figure out. But for now at least, he wasn't entirely alone. The flood. A jaundiced sky, bruised with purple, had been brewing all morning, setting Jebediah on edge. Mac's gaze kept straying to the river, a mere trickle yesterday, now boasting a dangerous swell. Gonna be a real soaker, Jeb, he'd rasped, punctuating the warning with a spit of tobacco juice. Better brace yourself. Jebediah hadn't heeded the warning closely enough. He'd been preoccupied mending fences, his thoughts split between the task and the vacant chair at the supper table. Clementine had been gone a week, visiting her sister somewhere. The name eluded him. All he could register was the stark emptiness of the house. devoid of the comforting aroma of her baking and the percussive tap-tap-tap of Princess Fluffybutt's claws on the hardwood. Then the skies opened. Not a gentle sprinkle, but a torrential deluge, each raindrop the size of buckshot. The river, already swollen, surged into a violent fit. Within the hour, it had transformed into a ravenous beast, clawing at the earth, devouring saplings whole. "Floods here, Jeb," Mac bellowed, riding up on his paint horse, rain sluicing off the brim of his hat. "Gotta get the herd to higher ground, pronto." Adrenaline surged through Jebediah. He snapped out orders, his voice a sharp counterpoint to the storm's roar. He knew this land intimately, every rise and dip. He knew where to find the safest refuge for his cattle. "Mac, you take Johnson and Riley, head south, gather the strays. I'll lead the main herd north to Widow's Hill." Princess Fluffybutt, blissfully unaware, emitted excited little barks at his feet. Jebediah scooped her up, nestling her beneath his oilskin coat. "Hush now, you little critter," he grumbled, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. The cattle, sensing the impending peril, stirred restlessly, their low bellows swallowed by the tempest. On horseback, Jebediah urged them forward, boots drenched, the stinging rain needling his skin. The river surged, a muddy tide licking across the pasture, turning the ground into a treacherous morass. Hours dissolved into a desperate scramble. The men, soaked and shivering, worked relentlessly, driving the herd uphill, away from the relentless advance of the water. Jagged lightning split the sky, painting the scene in stark flashes. The panicked cattle, the heaving flanks of the horses, the grim determination etched on his ranch hands' faces. Finally, as twilight descended, they reached Widow's Hill, a craggy rise offering a precarious sanctuary. The cattle clustered together, flanks trembling, eyes wide with dread. Jebediah surveyed the scene, a knot of anxiety in his gut. They were safe for the moment, but the river remained a threat. The downpour persisted, an unyielding assault. As darkness thickened, a fresh wave of dread washed over him. The ranch house. It stood lower than Widow's Hill, far too close to the raging current. He spurred his horse back toward the homestead, Mac shadowing him. The floodwaters already licked at the porch steps. The outbuildings were submerged, the chicken coop bobbing like a child's forgotten toy. "Damn," Jebediah swore, his voice raspy. He dismounted, wading through the knee-deep water toward the house. The front door swung inward, a casualty of the encroaching water. Inside, the ground floor was already inundated, furniture adrift in the murky depths. Mac splashed in behind him. "Anything worth saving, Jeb?" Jebediah swept the space with his gaze, his heart plummeting. His mother's china cabinet, his father's cherished armchair, all ruined. Then his gaze snagged on the staircase, leading to the upper floor, to Clementine's room, to her belongings. The quilts, he managed, his voice a mere breath. She had some quilts her grandmother made. He charged upstairs, Mac on his heels. The water hadn't breached the second floor yet, but the floorboards felt slick, the air thick with the cloying scent of mildew. He shoved open the door to Clementine's room. It remained untouched as she'd left it, her lavender sachet gracing the dresser, her sewing basket perched on the windowsill. And there, folded with care on the bed, lay the quilts. 3 of them, each an explosion of color and intricate needlework. He snatched them up, cradling them like priceless gems. These weren't mere blankets, they were a tangible piece of her, a fragment of home. As he turned to go, something else caught his eye. A small wooden box tucked away in the corner. He retrieved it. It was locked. He hesitated. Then, on a sudden urge, forced it open. Inside, nestled in a bed of worn velvet, lay a bundle of letters. His letters. The ones he'd penned to her before her arrival. The ones he'd dismissed as mundane. The ones she'd kept. He stared at them, his heart pounding. He hadn't grasped, until that moment, the magnitude of those letters, the depth of his feelings for her. He tucked the box under his arm, careful not to let it slip, and hurried back downstairs, the quilts clutched tightly to his chest. The flood continued its rampage, but in that moment, standing in the waterlogged house, cradling Clementine's quilts and letters, Jebediah felt a spark of something unfamiliar, hope, courage in the storm. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it had intensified, transforming the world outside into a blurry watercolor painting of gray and green. Clementine watched from the relative dryness of the bunkhouse porch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jebediah had been gone for hours battling the rising river, trying to save what was left of his herd. Mac, his face etched with worry lines that seemed to deepen with every passing hour, paced beside her. He's a stubborn mule, that one, he muttered, more to himself than to Clementine. But he knows those cattle. Knows every rock and ripple in that river. Clementine wrung her hands. Helplessness gnawed at her. She couldn't ride, couldn't rope, couldn't do any of the things a proper ranch wife should be able to do in a crisis. But she could bake. And baking, she realized, was about more than just creating something delicious. It was about transforming raw ingredients into something useful. An idea sparked in her mind. "Mac," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Do you have any empty grain sacks?" "Lots of them." He stopped pacing, his brow furrowed. "Grain sacks? What for, darlin'?" "We need sandbags," she explained, already heading inside. "Or, well, flour and bran bags. Anything to divert the water." Mac stared at her for a moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. "Now that's thinking outside the chuck wagon. There's a whole stack of empties in the feed shed. You want a hand?" Working side by side, they hauled the sacks to the porch. Clementine directed Mac to shovel the spilled flour and bran from the overturned barrels, remnants of the storm's initial fury, into the sacks. It wasn't sand, but it was heavy and absorbent, and hopefully, just hopefully, it would make a difference. She showed Mac how to pack them tightly, using her rolling pin to compress the mixture. "Like making a giant dumpling," she explained, a small smile playing on her lips. They worked tirelessly, the rhythmic thud of the rolling pin a counterpoint to the relentless drumming of the rain. Soon, a small barricade of makeshift sandbags lined the edge of the porch, a fragile defense against the raging storm. Suddenly, a high-pitched bark pierced through the downpour. Princess Fluffybutt, who had been huddled under a chair, darted towards the barn, barking frantically. She ran back and forth between the bunkhouse and the barn, her tiny body vibrating with urgency. What in tarnation is wrong with that little critter? Mac wondered aloud, but Clementine was already moving. She followed Princess Fluffia towards the barn, the little dog nipping at her heels. As they rounded the corner, she saw it, a widening crack in the makeshift dam they had built earlier to protect the lower pasture. Water was gushing through, threatening to collapse the entire structure. "Mac!" "The dam!" she yelled, her voice barely audible above the roar of the water. Mac understood instantly. He grabbed a shovel and raced towards the breach, Clementine close behind. They worked feverishly, piling more flour-filled sacks against the crack, but the force of the water was immense. It felt like trying to hold back the ocean with a teacup. Meanwhile, Jebediah was locked in a desperate battle of his own. The river had swelled beyond recognition, transforming the familiar landscape into a churning, muddy maelstrom. His cattle, panicked and disoriented, were struggling to stay afloat. He rode his horse, Buck, through the raging current, urging the herd towards higher ground. The water was icy cold, numbing his limbs. Debris swirled around him, branches, fence posts, even entire trees ripped from their roots. He saw one of his heifers swept away, disappearing into the torrent. A surge of despair washed over him, but he pushed it down. He couldn't afford to lose any more. He spotted a small group of cattle stranded on a small rise, cut off from the rest of the herd. They were huddled together, shivering and terrified. Jebediah knew he had to reach them, but the current was too strong. He took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the reins, and urged Buck forward. The horse hesitated, sensing the danger, but Jebediah spurred him on. They plunged into the churning water, the force of the current threatening to sweep them away. Buck fought valiantly, his powerful muscles straining against the relentless flow. Jebediah leaned low in the saddle, using his body weight to help the horse maintain his balance. They were tossed and turned, battered by the debris, but they kept moving forward, inch by agonizing inch. Finally, they reached the stranded cattle. Jebediah worked quickly, cutting them loose and herding them towards the relative safety of the higher ground. He knew the risk was immense, but he couldn't leave them to drown. He wouldn't. Back at the ranch, Clementine and Mac watched in horror as the dam finally gave way, sending a wall of water cascading towards the lower pasture. They knew Jebediah was out there, somewhere in that raging torrent. Fear, raw and visceral, gripped Clementine's heart. She had to do something. Anything. A new beginning. The world smelled of wet earth and loss. Dawn painted the ravaged landscape in bruised hues of purple and gray. Clementine stood beside Jebediah, the flour-dusted remnants of their desperate barricade clinging to her dress. His face, etched with exhaustion and grief, was turned towards the swollen river, now slowly receding, revealing the skeletal remains of trees and the muddy corpses of drowned livestock. He didn't speak, just stared. Clementine reached out, her hand hovering hesitantly before she dared to touch his arm. It was stiff, unyielding. Princess Fluffybutt, miraculously unscathed, whined softly at their feet, nudging Jebediah's boot with her wet nose. Finally, he turned to her. His eyes, usually the color of flint, were clouded with remorse. Clementine, he began, his voice rough. I owe you an apology. I brought you here under false pretenses. This isn't what you signed up for. Clementine swallowed, the lump in her throat familiar. It's worse, she managed, her voice trembling, than I imagined. Worse, he agreed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. But you stood your ground. You fought. I never expected. He trailed off, unable to articulate the surprise and reluctant admiration that had bloomed within him during the storm. You're stronger than you look, Clementine Buttercup. She managed a watery smile. And you're not as gruff as you pretend to be, Jebediah Stone. He sighed, the sound heavy with weariness. The ranch, it's going to take years to recover. I lost half my herd. What will you do? He looked out at the devastation, then back at her, a flicker of something new, hope, perhaps? In his eyes. I don't know. But I know I can't do it alone. And I think you might be the partner I need. Clementine blinked, surprised. Partner? Yes. You're resourceful, Clementine. And you have skills. Skills I desperately need. He gestured vaguely towards the muddy mess. We can't just rely on cattle anymore. Not after this. He took a deep breath. I have some savings. Enough, maybe, to rebuild the house and to invest in something new. I was thinking, you mentioned your baking. The town, well, they could use a decent bakery. Clementine's heart leaped. A bakery? Here? It seemed impossible. A whimsical dream amidst the harsh reality of ranch life. But, a bakery, she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. A bakery, Jebediah confirmed. And maybe we could raise some chickens, sell eggs, diversify. He looked almost sheepish. You know, I overheard Mac talking about your pies. Said they were better than his mama's. And Mac's mama makes a mean apple pie. Clementine's smile widened. So you're proposing a partnership? A bakery ranch hybrid? Something like that, he admitted, his gaze meeting hers. We could call it Stone and Buttercup. Or Buttercup and Stone. Whatever you prefer. Stone and Buttercup, Clementine said decisively. It sounds solid. The next few months were a blur of hard work and hesitant collaboration. Jebediah, with Clementine at his side, began the arduous task of rebuilding. They cleared debris, salvaged what they could, and slowly, painstakingly, started anew. The house, smaller than the original, but sturdier, rose from the mud. Meanwhile, Clementine, with Jebediah's reluctant assistance, transformed a portion of the barn into a bakery. The scent of freshly baked bread and cinnamon rolls soon mingled with the earthy smell of the ranch, a strange but comforting blend. The townsfolk, initially skeptical, were quickly won over by Clementine's pastries. Her sourdough bread, her delicate cakes, her legendary pies, they were a taste of civilization in the rugged landscape. Stone and Buttercup became a local institution, a place where ranchers and townsfolk alike gathered for a sweet treat and a moment of respite. Jebediah still ran the ranch, albeit on a smaller scale. He learned to tolerate the chickens, even to appreciate the fresh eggs they provided. He even, on occasion, sampled Clementine's creations, his gruff exterior softening with each bite. Years passed. The scars of the flood remained, a reminder of the devastation they had overcome. But the ranch and the unlikely family that had taken root there had also flourished. Jebediah and Clementine, partners in business and in life, had built something extraordinary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink, Clementine, Jebediah, and a small, bright-eyed child with Clementine's blonde hair and Jebediah's flint-colored eyes sat on the porch watching the sunset. Princess Fluffy, but now ancient and gray, but still fiercely loyal, lay curled at their feet. The child, a little girl named Daisy, leaned against Jebediah, her small hand resting in his calloused one. Clementine smiled, her heart overflowing with a love she never thought possible. Papa, Daisy said, pointing to the sky, look at the pretty colors. Jebediah squeezed her hand. They are pretty, Daisy. Just like your mama's pies. Clementine laughed, a warm, genuine sound that echoed across the ranch. The storm had brought devastation, but it had also brought them together, forging a bond stronger than any flood. It had given them a new beginning, a new family, and a life richer and more fulfilling than either of them could have ever imagined. And as they sat there, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, Clementine knew that she was finally home.